Thanks. I'm Adam Archer. I'm a development manager at Shopify, and today I'm going to tell you about how we've scaled our R&D to thousands of people without dedicated QA. Before I do, I want to give you a bit of context on our company and our scale and what we do. Context is a really important word at Shopify. We believe that the context in which we act is critical to the decisions we make. And so that's why I think it's really important for you to have context on us. All right, so some high-level business-y stuff. Shopify is the lead-in multi-channel commerce platform in the world. And what it means to be a multi-channel commerce platform is that we enable our merchants to sell to their buyers wherever they are, whether that's as a visitor to their online store, as a user of their mobile app, on a marketplace like Amazon or eBay, social channels like Facebook or Instagram, or anywhere else, even in person in a physical store. It also gives them the tools they need to power the back office of their business. Some numbers to note on the slide for sort of relevance of scale is that we're powering over 800,000 businesses. And to date, Shopify's processed $125 billion in cumulative sales. So the scale is large. All right, enough about that. Let's take a closer look at the architecture, albeit from a very high layer. Like any modern web application, we're composed of many different services. But something that's different about Shopify from most is that we do have one central monolithic application. It's a Rails app that we call Shopify Core. And this powers most of the business logic of Shopify. Pretty much anything that's truly core to commerce and core to our business lives in Core. And the talk will be focused here. It'll be focused here mostly because this is where the most complexity arises. This is where the rate of change is the highest, there's the most contributions, we're deploying the most, and things can go wrong the most. So I'm going to tell you about the tools and process we use to do this. But it's important to note that all of the tools, everything you're going to see here, it's all actually available to all of the other services and to the entire company as well. This tends to be where change is driven from, but it's available to everyone. So let's put some numbers to all that. We're deploying on average 800 times per day across the company. And 40 of those are to Shopify Core, to that massive application. Usually contained during business hours, but people do deploy outside of that. That's a lot. And meanwhile, the site is serving 83,000 requests per second, and there's about $130 million of sales flowing through the platform. So naturally, incidents are impactful, and high availability is very important to us. One last thing about how we're structured before I get into the good stuff. We're a global company at this point. We've got 13 offices across 9 cities and spanning a 10-hour time difference. So anyone who's done remote work will know that this certainly complicates shipping and delivery and development. And we do all of this without QA. But what does that really mean? QA stands for quality assurance. So if we were doing all of this without QA, does that mean we're not assuring the quality of our software? That sounds like a bad idea. So it's not really true. What I mean by this is we do all of this without a dedicated QA team. We believe that QA, assuring the quality of the changes we ship, is part of the developer's role. It's part of their job. And it is worth mentioning that what we do have is we have an organization called Kernel, whose job is, among other things, to support all development teams and provide them the tools that they need to really be able to do this effectively. So at Shopify, developers own their own changes, from concept right through to authoring them and to deploying them to production. Nothing goes out without the developer that wrote it looking at it and making sure it's OK. All right, let's move on to the good part, the tools and process we use to do this. I'm going to break this into 2 different pieces. The first is how we actually author changes, what goes into actually writing code at Shopify. And the second is how we deploy it to production. I will spend most of the time in the talk here, but I want to give you a warning first. The tools and process don't actually matter. And I'm going to talk more about that later. This is a bit of a spoiler alert for later in the talk. All right, let's talk about the tools. So first, how do we prepare changes to be shipped? What goes into actually writing the code? Everything, of course, starts with a local development environment. So I want to first introduce you to a tool called dev. This is a command line utility that's critical to our work at Shopify. it does a ton of things, and I'm not going to go into all of them in detail here, but I'll show you sort of like the high-level elevator pitch. So anyone at Shopify, any developer anyway, can run any service with a few simple command line commands, and these are the same regardless of what service you're trying to run. So this is the command to clone Shopify core. What this will do is it'll clone the Git repository and change the working directory into it for you. It clones it to like a well-known location. One more command, dev up, will do anything the service needs to be ready to run. This will include things like bundling and packaging. Depending on the service, it might have build steps, it might automate some configuration, and it'll start VMs for supporting infrastructure that the service needs, things like databases and caching layers. Once that's done, dev server will run the server, and it'll be ready to start handling requests, and it'll spit out in the console like where you can find it. And dev also gives you other commands to actually access the running app and stuff, but I'm not going to go into all of that. All right, so from here I'm going to glaze over everything that happens between getting your environment running and being ready to open a pull request. That's what all of your jobs are, presumably. That's what developers do. So I'm not going to talk about it. So you figure out what you want to do, you change the application, and then you're ready to open a pull request. We use GitHub for everything. I'm assuming most people are familiar with GitHub. So you've probably seen this before. You probably have templates on most of GitHub pull request templates on most of your repositories. But I want to talk about how we use ours at Shopify. So we're growing constantly, quickly. And what that means is there's new people ship into Shopify core all the time. So it's very important, because these new people are owning all of their changes all the way through to production, that we give them the context that they need to be able to be successful. And so what you'll see in our template is that it asks some really pointed questions, and it ensures they're thinking about some of the right things. It focuses on things like, what are the impact of these changes on Shopify, on our merchants, and on our third-party partners. But meanwhile, it's also important that this template is really succinct and to the point, and focuses people on the most important things. So most of what you saw there was actually in comments. And the template itself focuses on things like, have you tested these changes? Have you thought about if this pull request can be rolled back if something goes wrong in production? So once the pull request is open, we use bots heavily in GitHub. There's a couple that you're seeing here, and I'll describe what they do. So the more prevalent one is caution tape bot. What this is, it's a general purpose tool that allows anyone in the company to define some rules that will match against the pull request and post automated comments. So you can do things like post a comment based on the files that are touched, or even the content of the changes, like actual string matching in the diffs. This, again, allows us to give highly contextual information to a developer exactly when they need it, when they're about to make the change. And we can use this to do things like inform them about things that they should be considering, or even ping a team that might have some context on the type of change they're making. They might want to review the change firsthand or engage with them and give them some insights. The other one you see here is our schema verification bot. What this is doing is making sure that if you're changing any APIs, you've versioned them properly, and you're not going to accidentally break our platform and hurt our partners. We test like crazy. Testing, I mean, you're all here for a reason, right? Testing is fundamental to any collaborative development team, and none of this works without investing heavily in our automated test suite and in CI. I'm not going to go into it at length because I can't squeeze this into a talk that has a lot of other content, and frankly, this warrants a talk on its own, or hey, a whole conference. Suffice it to say that this is critical to us. We code review. Similar to testing, this topic is massive and warrants, again, a talk on its own or many. So I won't go into length on code reviewing best practices and stuff. But what I will do is tell you a couple things about how we use code review at Shopify. So we strive for 2 code reviewers in every pull request. But it's not a hard and fast rule. The actual rule is to ship on confidence. Again, the developer has the most context on the change they're making, and they're the one that is the best judge of if the change is safe. The reason that it's not a hard rule is that in an emergency, if our platform is down or there's an incident or an outage and someone's responding and literally knows what needs to happen but can't find someone to help them review it, we want to empower them to make the correct decision and to ship the change. We don't want a hard gate-in block. Rest assured, if you do ship a pull request with absolutely no reviews, that will get flagged, and someone will come knocking to find out why you did it and make sure that you are behaving responsibly. Another thing we do is that we prioritize actually testing changes when we're reviewing code, not just looking at the code, looking at the test, squinting, is this good, does it make sense? And we call this top hatting. I won't go into the origins of where that term came from, but it's a widely used term at Shopify. To top hat means to test something. And so that means to actually try someone else's change for real. But this can be really disruptive. If I'm working on my own stuff on the same repository as a pull request that I'm going to review, and I want to test my colleague's change, that might require setting up some local state in my database. It might require all sorts of things, and it depends on the nature of the pull request. That might require me to suspend my work and figure out how to resume it later. So it actually can be hard. So I want to show you one more thing that dev can do. I said it does a lot. This is sort of a cool one. With one command, a developer can run dev top hat push. And what this will do is it'll bundle everything about the state of their local environment. It'll save a snapshot of their database, all of the systems involved, compress it, and upload it to the cloud. And it'll associate it to the branch that they were on. Another developer can then run dev top hat pull and give a link to the pull request. And that'll actually check out the branch, suspend their state, set up the full state that was pushed by their colleague, and get them completely ready to test. It'll do all the DevOps stuff to make sure the database is warm and all that stuff. And then they can test, do whatever they need to do, and then dev top hat stop, and they get back to exactly where they were and can get back to their work. So our mobile team, I'm going to take a quick detour now from the sort of Shopify core shipping web apps case study and show you something that our mobile team is doing because it's inspired by this and it's actually way cooler. So mobile takes it a step further. When you use dev iOS top hat in a mobile pull request, it'll actually go out to our build system and it'll fetch the built image for that branch, pull it down locally, and run it right on the simulator. So anyone at Shopify, even non-developers, can top hat any mobile change without even having an environment set up, as long as they've got the simulator. And it's worth mentioning that when our dev acceleration team saw this, they are now actively working on doing the same thing for web and backend changes as well. OK, so that's it for authoring, for writing code. Next, I want to talk about deploying it. And I'm going to take you through the whole process. And again, it'll be focused on that core service. Before I do, a comment on sort of our deployment ethos. How many people know what continuous delivery is? Everybody, yeah. So continuous delivery basically means that if a change is on master, it's on production or it's going to production. At least that's how we think about it. So this is our high-level ship-in process for core. And before I talk you through this, I want to tell you that we use a tool called Shipit. Shipit is responsible for sort of managing this process for it. And I'll take you through Shipit in the next couple slides. I just wanted to tell you about it because I sort of reference it here. It's a bit relevant. So because of the very high rate of change on Shopify core, I mentioned that we're deploying 40 times per day. I didn't give you the number of pull requests. I actually don't have that statistic. But the rate of change is very high. And if developers were actually just merging their changes to production, and we were trying to keep up and deploy those, it would be very hard to control what our deployments look like. It would be very hard to diagnose breakages and incidents. So developers aren't merging directly to master. What's happening is when a developer is ready to ship something, they add it to something called the merge queue, which is a concept of Shipit. That's why I mentioned Shipit. Once the change is ready to be deployed, so effectively Shipit at some point will decide that that change should merge to master. It's roughly ordered, but I won't go into the details. Then the change rolls out to canaries. And that means that it deploys to 5% of production, 5% of Shopify. From there, the developer can test in canaries, make sure that everything's fine, and if there's no issues, it'll roll out 100%, the rest of production. All right, so let me show you what Shipit actually looks like and tell you a little bit about how it works. Like I said, Shipit's responsible primarily for two things. It's responsible for merging your pull requests to master and for facilitating how those pull requests actually get deployed. It's the thing that's actually doing the deployment. So you can see what's in the merge queue here. I didn't show a picture of the merge queue, but you can picture it. It's a list of commits, just like the list you're seeing here. And Shipit, like I said, will decide when those should merge, and it does it based on a number of heuristics. It'll be trying to do things like ensuring our deploys are a relatively reasonable side, but trading off throughput. So, if we have more people trying to ship, we might need to do bigger deployments, but we do try and keep it contained so that incidents can be investigated more readily. And all these heuristics are configurable. So, we evolve them as they need to change for the needs of our platform. Once stuff is merged into master, you can see the undeployed commits on master on this main page. So this is showing you stuff that is in master, but actually hasn't made it to production yet. So this is all the stuff that's sort of like on deck to be deployed. And once it hits master, CI runs again, just to make sure that everything is good, even after the merge, that our whole test suite is okay. And that's what those green check marks are. So in this case, everything is passed, and this looks pretty healthy. There's a manual deployment button, so you can click that to trigger a manual deployment to production if you know exactly what needs to go out. But like I said, that's not really where the magic of Shipit is. Shipit is really intended to manage the deployments for you and decide when a deploy should happen based on those heuristics. And so that's what you can see here. It's going to give you sort of a preview of what it expects to deploy. And if there was a whole bunch of stuff in master, it might actually pick something that's not right at the top, and it might actually roll it out over a couple deploys. So Shopify core, like I said, we have this concept of a canary environment and a production environment. What you're seeing here is the Shipit stack for canaries. And the way that this whole thing works is there's a separate stack for production, and only once the canary deploy is green, it actually uses that as one of the checks that feeds whether the commits are okay for production. And that'll in the production stack would show up as one of the checks that feeds that green check mark. So when a deploy is actually running, the deploy buttons are disabled, and Shipit shows you the currently deploying commits just below the uncommitted stuff. Again, what isn't shown here is if you scroll further down, it'll show you that there's a current deploy, and it'll show you all of the previous deployments. And then there's controls there to do things like abort the deploy if there was a problem, and or roll back to a previous known good deploy. The last thing I want to show you about Shipit is when something goes wrong, Shipit can be locked. And what this does is it'll stop Shipit from doing any merges to master or triggering any production deployments, and basically puts it in sort of like a manual mode. So you see that, I didn't highlight it, but there's an enable emergency mode button on the right there. So that'll allow you to, even though Shipit is locked, turn that on and do things like pick exactly which commit you want to deploy to try and fix production effectively. In this case, Shipit was locked because someone had performed a revert with Shipit, so that message you're seeing there is actually automated. If a developer were to lock it manually, then they're able to provide a message as well to give context on what's wrong. And that's actually really important because that message is visible to the rest of our developers. And so without actually asking any questions, you can sort of just look at Shipit and you know exactly what's wrong and don't need to talk to anyone. You can sort of just wait until it's ready. Okay, so that's what Shipit looks like at sort of like a high level. And if you actually look at the tool, now we'll take you through how a developer engages with this and actually gets their code out. So this probably looks familiar. Again, I'm assuming you all know about GitHub and have at least used it or looked at it. So this probably looks mostly familiar, except there's something weird on this screen, right? There's a weird little anchor that you're not used to seeing. So everyone at Shopify has a browser plugin installed that integrates with Shipit. And what this does is it's actually looking at the state of that Canary Stack. So this is a pull request to Shopify core, and the place that Shopify core rolls out to first is that Canary Stack. So the browser plugin is checking to see, is Shipit clear? Is it locked? Is everything okay? And it gives the developer the context about what's going on in production right where they're ready to merge the pull request. A couple other things to note is that there's the big green add to merge queue button. That's the thing that they're using to actually ship their change that puts it in the merge queue and ship it. And the last thing worth noting is that the merge pull request button is still there, but it's de-emphasized. So normally on a green pull request, that would be that bright, inviting, shiny green color, just like the add to merge queue button. Our extension actually makes it look a little bit more muted to sort of like reinforce you really should be adding to the merge queue. But back to what I was saying earlier about not explicitly requiring approvals, we want that button to be there in case something's down, something needs to be restored, and you actually do need to merge straight to master and bypass the merge queue and bypass Shipit. So that'll be a thing that gets used when Shipit is locked as a means to fix forward, if that's the best thing to do. If there is a problem with the Shipit stack, that big happy green anchor turns into a big angry red anchor, and you're given the context on exactly why it's locked. But again, note that that add to merge queue button is still green. So if you are confident that you're going to be around for a while and you'll be able to monitor your change going out to production once Shipit is unlocked and whatever's going on is resolved, you can still throw it in the merge queue. And that's where ChatOps comes in. We use ChatOps. Who knows what ChatOps is? Is this a prevalent enough term? OK, I'll define it. So ChatOps is it's a practice where operators of a production system actually use chat tools to control what's going on in production, or to get information about it, or actually make changes to what's happening in their infrastructure. And so we have this chatbot in our Slack called Spy. It does all sorts of things. You can ask it questions about what's going on in production and actually have it do things for you. I'm not going to talk about any of that here, but it's important sort of context to understand. So in this case, what I'm showing you is when your change is about to roll out to production, Spy will send you a direct message on Slack and let you know. And it'll do more than that. It'll actually give you, again, some context and some instructions on what you need to do to make sure your deploy is successful. In this case, it's telling you, go watch the operations channel so that if anyone else is experiencing problems or anything goes wrong, that's where you'll see it. And it also gives you a link to this deployment dashboard that you should look at. So let me show you what that looks like. What this dashboard is showing you is it's contrasting the state in our full production system against the state in that isolated 5% production. And so you can see things like if there's suddenly a ton more exceptions, or our response time spikes, or background jobs start failing, you'll be able to see if the ratios are way out of whack, and that's happening way more in Canaries. And that'll be a pretty clear-cut sign that something was wrong with the deployment, and that you should go ahead and lock the production stack to make sure that this doesn't roll out further, and figure out what needs to happen. Probably roll back and investigate. And the big yellow helper text basically describes all of that for you. So once it rolls out completely, or once the deployment completes, I should say, Spy will ping you again, and it'll say, again, the deploy worked, and gives you more information on what it is you need to do next. So first it'll tell you, you have 8 minutes to verify this, or we're going to deploy it to production. And it'll tell you how you can actually verify it and what you need to do. It tells you to use this tool called Ubercorn. So let me show you what that is. This is another browser plugin. It does all sorts of cool things. It lets developers interact with production shops in all sorts of ways. We can dig into our internal dashboards and find out things about the shop, that kind of stuff. But what I want to talk about here is that there's a toggle at the bottom that lets you control whether your traffic is going to be routed through the Canary infrastructure or through the main production infrastructure, or just default, if we should let Shopify choose. So this is a really easy way for you to ensure that you're hitting Canaries when you want to verify your changes before they roll out to the rest of Shopify. You can also use browser headers to do this if you are testing some more backend-y thing that isn't driven by the browser. If you don't lock any stacks and you don't report any changes in 8 minutes, then Shipit assumes that everything is good, and it sends you this message to let you know that your deployment to Canaries was complete. And at this point, this message means it'll go to production at some point. When the production stack decides to pick it up, you'll get another message, again giving you context on what to do. This time it's linking to a different deploy dashboard. Let's look at that one. So this dashboard is much higher level, and what it's doing is it's giving technical and business metrics about the overall health of our platform. So we're not contrasting sort of Canaries against production now. Now we're looking at like very high level metrics. Are the requests per minute changing? Are the jobs per minute changing? Is our throughput going down? Is server response time elevated? And then it also, like I said, it looks at business metrics, like have the number of signups dropped? Have the number of successful payments dropped? So this gives you sort of context outside of your change on if you've adversely affected the platform in some unintended way. And again, can trigger locking Shipit, rolling back, et cetera. Once that's done, Spy notifies you one more time, and you're done. So that's the whole shipping process. That's how a developer actually gets their own changes out through production and verifies them. Before I move on from shipping, though, there's one other thing I wanted to talk about that's relevant here. And that's the developer air traffic controller rotation that we have, or dev-ATC for short. This is a rotation that not all developers are in the company. It's sort of like at some point, once you have a little bit of context and you've been around a while, you usually join the dev-ATC rotation. But what this is it's 3 developers per day who are focused solely on ensuring the health of our platform, having context on any incidents that have been going on, making sure those Shopify core Shipit stacks are healthy and unblocked, and if they aren't, working with people to get everything restored. And they don't do their day job while they're doing this. They cancel all meetings. They focus solely on this responsibility. It's always 2 newish people to the role and then 1 more experienced mentor to give them a bit of a safety net and make sure that they have the confidence to know what to do and how to act. And one thing that's really cool about this, not only does it benefit the rest of the company and make sure that we can all ship, but it's also a really cool way for newer devs to gain context on Shopify core. And it's not uncommon for people who are working on other services and don't know anything about core to actually do this role, and it's a great way to learn. All right, I alluded to this before. This is tongue-in-cheek. The tools in the process are vital. We couldn't operate this platform without any of what I just showed you. It's critical to us. So why do I say the tools and process don't matter? Well, we didn't always use these tools, and we won't always use these tools. They evolve. What I just showed you is temporal. As things break, we need to fix them. As our process falters, we need to improve it. So if it's not the tools that make this work, what is it? I think it's culture. And I'm going to tell you how I think our culture makes this possible. I'll first talk about Shopify culture at sort of a high level and give you some of our values. And then I'll talk about how I think that provides a lens on what we do in engineering. But first, let's define it. What is culture, really? Culture, to me, is a collection of the behaviors of a group of people. It's a really sort of amorphous and hard to define topic. It makes it really hard to talk about. It's a moving target, much like the tools. And so, because it's a collection of the group of people, every time we hire someone, our culture is changing a little bit. And like I said, we're growing constantly. We're growing all the time. So you can't really control this. The best you can do is set some values that you aspire to and try and live true to those. So I'm going to talk about those values from sort of a high level. And this is not like a comprehensive look at Shopify values. I'm using some stuff that I've picked to give you kind of like a lens, like I said, to what we do in engineering. We're powered by a trust battery. We default to trusting our employees, and we treat them like adults. When you join Shopify, you're inherently trusted more than a random person off the street. We expect employees to act autonomously and to own their own decision-making. Nobody's telling you what to do or in charge of your time. You're going to be on a project, and you need to figure out how to contribute to that project. but trust and autonomy comes first. As you do good things, as you behave along the lines of our values, your trust battery charges, and you're given more autonomy, more trust, more ownership. We are constant learners. We see challenges as opportunities to grow in new and interesting ways and learn new things. We see failures as opportunities to run retrospectives, figure out what went wrong, and figure out how to change our behavior to do better in the future. We focus on encouraging personal endeavors at Shopify, and we work really hard to ensure that everybody's role is aligned with their own sort of personal growth plans. This makes sure that people are engaged in what they're doing and come in like ready to contribute. We default to open internally. This is really unusual, especially for a company the size of Shopify. Information at Shopify by default is shared with the entire company. This goes right to things like our CEO shares the letters that he sends to the board of directors, which is not a thing that most companies do. And our executive team regularly holds AMAs or Ask Me Anythings where anyone at Shopify can ask them questions and they answer them. This follows almost naturally from the trust and autonomy concept that I talked about. Because if we expect people to make their own decisions and we want them to make good ones, they need to be armed with the most important information. We thrive on change. This one's hard. Change is constant in commerce. I'm sure you're all familiar with how constant change is in software. I mean, we're at a JavaScript conference. It's also constant in commerce. Nothing stays the same. Think about how you bought things 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. It's probably super different from today. So not just being comfortable with change and uncertainty, but thriving on it is important to us. And it's really hard to talk about how we do this. This is like a lifelong endeavor to be okay with this. All right, we are merchant obsessed. We have deep empathy for our merchants. And we focus really hard on fostering that empathy throughout the company. We do this by doing things like encouraging employees to run their own shops, to be merchants themselves. We do this by encouraging merchant visits, and not just for UX folks, but we want everyone in our company to be going and talking to merchants, finding out about their business, finding out about their problems. And we talk about merchant stories regularly. Even at company-wide meetings, where we're taking everybody in the company's time, we'll still tell a story about an individual merchant and what drives them. We do this because our merchants' businesses, their very livelihood, depend on our platform. When we're down, we can literally be causing someone's business to fail. There is impact to the work that we're doing, and it's important that our engineering team understands this, so that when we're responding to an outage, we know what's at stake. So with those values in mind, what does that mean to engineering at Shopify? How do we behave, and why do we have the tools and process that we have? I've talked about this throughout, but it's so pivotal to how we work that it bears repeating. Developers ship their own changes, and now that I've taken you through those cultural values, it probably almost seems obvious, right? High autonomy, high trust, ownership, empathy. It just follows that people should be owning their own changes and verifying them. So how do we empower people to do this? We leave signposts just in time where the context is relevant and important. You saw this theme through all the tools, right? It starts from the pull request template that gives them context they need, especially to newer employees. Caution tape bot, contextual to exactly what you're doing. You get just-in-time context. You saw it in deploying. We give you Slack messages to tell you exactly what you need to do and what you need to verify, and the deploy dashboards that help you understand if production is healthy, even if you don't know a lot about the system. We reduce friction. People are busy. It's a high-paced environment, and people are doing a lot of things that are not necessarily core to their own job or the stuff they're trying to do. If we're going to have developers doing QA, we need it to be as easy as possible, or it won't happen, or it won't happen effectively. And I think that's where a lot of QA teams come from, is that the developers don't have the time and the support they need to actually do this themselves. Similarly, shipping changes and resolving incidents needs to be easy as well. And you saw that in terms of how much we invest in tools like Shipit and our chat integrations. Culture is really hard to talk about. I said that before, and I did my best to kind of summarize some engineering behaviors, but it's such a moving target. So I'm going to try and summarize. This stands for too long, didn't read. It's a commonly used acronym at Shopify, and because it's such a highly contextual company, there's information flowing around everywhere. So it's actually really important that every piece of communication has a too long, didn't read. So let me try and summarize our culture in a couple points. As a company, when we see systemic problems, when we see that our developers can't ship, or that we're having incidents all the time, things are going down, or things are hard, we invest. We staff actual projects to invest in tools like these and to evolve our process. We invest with cross-functional teams that look at how our stuff is shipping and look at what the problems are to decide what to build and how to build it. So that's sort of the macro level at a company. But at an individual level, as developers, when we see small problems, when we see a red build that nobody's talking about, or a bug with dev that's stopping us from doing our job, what we don't do is go to the team and open an issue and nag them and tell them that they should fix their garbage tools. What we do is we clone the repository and we investigate the problem that we're encountering, and we come up with a solution, and we go to the team not with a problem, but with a solution. And this, again, flows from that autonomy. Because we give developers freedom to own their own time and to do the work that they think is important, our whole community contributes to these tools. It's vital to us. So to hammer some of this home, I want to give you a glimpse at the future. Everything you saw in this talk was created to solve some kind of problem. And we have a problem to solve right now. This is what Shipit does. I talked about this at length. It merges your changes to master, and then it runs continuous integration, and then if everything is good, it rolls out to production. Well, what happens when everything isn't good, and we get red CI on master, which happens? James talked about flaky tests. They exist. When that happens, we need to stop everything, and we need to investigate. Nobody can ship. Nobody can do anything until we understand why that's red and resolve it. This results in people wanting to ship, but changes being backed up, which winds up meaning that once this is resolved, we get bigger deployments, which are riskier and cause more outages and more incidents. So everything I just showed you, it's breaking for us right now. And so, like I said, we're staffing a project, and we're changing how Shipit works. And instead of merging to master first and then running CI, what we're going to do in a nutshell is run CI on a whole bunch of candidate sets of changes, and only once we have a green build will we fast forward master and deploy it immediately. This should reduce that churn and improve our throughput. I don't have time to talk about this in detail. In fact, I'm already really over time. Sorry, Paul. But others from Shopify will be talking about this in the future. I'd highly encourage you to check it out. It looks really cool. To wrap up and hammer this home a bit more, I want to show where we came from. I've only been at Shopify 3 years, but I asked some of the OG Shopify folks what deploys used to look like, and this is the favorite one I found. Apparently, to get a deployment, you used to go into the operations channel and ask someone to do it, and an operator with SSH access to production would deploy Shopify production from their laptop. Crazy. And just for a bit of fun, this is the first ever command that deployed Shopify when it was a snowboard brand, not a global e-commerce platform. In closing, a few thoughts. This was not a talk about tools or process or how we ship code at Shopify. It was definitely not a talk about QA or whether or not you should do it. QA makes sense in a lot of environments, and you all have the context on what you're doing to know if it does. This was a talk about culture. Human behavior stems from cultural norms and values, and people want to be recognized and celebrated for their good deeds, and they won't do them if they aren't. If you value the tools and process you use to ship code, you must build your culture around them. Thanks.